My name is Margaret Miller, and I welcome you to the opening conversation for our summer virtual exhibition titled Life During Wartime, Art in the Age of the Coronavirus. I have the privilege of serving as the director of the Institute for Research in Art in the College of the Arts at the University of South Florida. The Institute is made up of three distinct but related programs: the Contemporary Art Museum, Graphic Studio, and Public Art. Christian Viveros-Fauné, our curator at large, conceived Life During Wartime in the Age of the Coronavirus as a means of bringing selected artists from all over the world together as we try and reimagine life and the role of the arts during this pandemic. The global crisis has become more acute as in the last weeks, demonstrations over racism and police brutality have spread across the world. All indications suggest this may be a pivotal moment as a broad coalition of people are now dedicated to transforming cultural conditions and making political change. I am hopeful. I, along with the faculty and staff of the Institute for Research in Art, are committed to listening and learning and joining with colleagues across the campus and in the community as we continue to evaluate and reevaluate how we can elevate and support artists' voices and bring their work to our students' broader community and beyond. Maybe there's a silver lining that comes with the necessity of working in a virtual environment to deliver exhibitions and programs. While participants lose the experience of directly engaging art objects, we can increase audiences, show a wide range of artists' work that would be difficult to bring to campus, and experiment with ways to have a global conversation about what we are experiencing. My thanks to the participating artists. As of this moment, Christian Viveros-Fauné has invited more than 50 artists to participate in this virtual exhibition. I also recognize and thank the amazing team at the Contemporary Art Museum, led by Deputy Director Noelle Smith, for their work in organizing Life During Wartime. Now it is my pleasure to introduce you to Noelle Smith. She will serve as the moderator of today's conversation. Noelle?
Thank you, Margaret. Welcome everyone to the opening event of Life During Wartime. Over the next few months, we're going to be continually adding artist pages and events. So please check in with us often for the latest as it unfolds. We must first thank the many artists who so generously agreed to participate, and to the artists Basil Kincaid, Cristina Lucas, Narsiso Martinez, and Spencer Tunick, who are with us today in conversation. For the past 2 months, the entire team has been focused like a laser on creating this exhibition, and virtually every person has been contributing significantly. And I'm grateful and awed by their talent, imagination, and cheerful dedication. However, there are 3 people I'd like to recognize for their particularly vital roles. Director Margaret Miller for her visionary leadership, Curator Christian Viveros-Fauné for the obvious, and one other person you won't meet today, but who is working tirelessly behind the scenes. And that's our Curator of New Media, Don Fuller, who was the technological engine behind it all. I'd also like to recognize and thank the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts and the Florida Department of State for their support. In very short order, we'll start the program, but first let me tell you how it will proceed today. I'm going to introduce Curator Christian Viveros-Fauné, and after his talk, he will introduce our 4 guest artists and engage in a conversation. Christian will probably also lead us through a little walkthrough of the exhibition. At a certain point, we're going to open for viewer comments and questions in written form. So if you're interested in contributing, here's how that will work. If you're watching on Zoom, please address your questions to the Q&A button you see at the bottom right of your screen. And if you're tuning in on Facebook Live, you can leave questions in the comment field. Please keep them brief and to the point, and be aware that we will not be able to answer them all. we'll do the best we can. So thank you for your understanding and patience. And now it is my honor and privilege to introduce to you the curator of Life During Wartime, the Contemporary Art Museum's curator at large, Christian Viveros-Fauné. Christian Viveros-Fauné, born in Santiago in 1965, has worked as a gallerist, art fair director, art critic, and curator since 1994. He was awarded a USF Kennedy Family Visiting Fellowship in 2018, a Creative Capital Warhol Foundation grant for short form arts writing in 2009, was named art critic in residence at the Bronx Museum in 2011, and has lectured at Yale University, Pratt Institute, and Amsterdam's Gerrit Rietveld Academy. Viveros-Fauné is chief critic for Artland and writes regularly for Art Review and Sotheby's Art Agency Partners, in other words. He has curated numerous museum exhibitions around the world and is also the author of several books. His most recent, Social Forms, A Short History of Political Art, was published by Davis Werner Books in 2018. Welcome, Christian.
Thank you, Noelle. Thank you, everyone who's tuned in. Thank you to the artists. Thank you to everybody at USF who helped make this show possible. It's been a challenge. We basically tried to put this together in about a month and a half. And essentially we are trying, like most people are, to keep up with world events, which seem to change just about every 24 hours. I should say that as I give my spiel, as it were, I want all of you who are watching to scroll through the 6 contributions that we have up right now online. Pardon me. So that you see the show, you engage with the show. As I think you know, this is an evolving exhibition, so we will be adding on a weekly basis more contributions, probably about 4 a week, with dedicated email blasts through the end of October, probably the first week of November, when we will have everything up, right? And then the exhibition ends on the 12th of December. Let me say a little bit more about the exhibition. This show, humbly, and I say humbly because I think we all need to acknowledge the incompleteness of our particular points of view today, and our potential blind spots in our perspectives. Thank you, Don, for actually scrolling through while I talk. That's also important. So I think we all have to be aware of those blind spots, and of the incompleteness of our particular views, where our views come from. But like I said, this show intends to humbly engage a select company of artists to respond to the overwhelming realities of the crisis that's gripped the planet since March 5, the date the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. The exhibition intends to take full advantage of one of the few outlets artists still have, which is the internet, obviously, during a public health emergency recently exacerbated by the wanton murder of George Floyd by police officers in Minneapolis. It aims to mobilize sentiment, thought, and activity around art and its enduring possibilities, its role as a conceptual catalyst, its ability to trigger ideas, stories, conversations, emotions, feelings, and mental states. Separately and together, each artist's contribution, and right now we have about 53, if I believe I'm right in saying, I think it's 53. Each artist's contribution provides a picture of the planet of a planet in crisis, now further enraged and victimized by violence, but also images of hope and optimism in the face of a global emergency. A couple more words about the exhibition itself. The show, at least presently, obviously, is entirely online. While we hope to be able to physically host some version of Life During Wartime, the only safe way to make shows in the era of COVID-19 is to do so virtually. That's to say, not physically, right? Without objects we can walk around and appreciate, but with images and the powerful distortions that entails. And we'll talk about what those are in greater detail with the artists later. Secondly, I want to point out that the exhibition, again, will unspool over time. So that these first 6 artist contributions that you're seeing today will expand weekly and continue to evolve in the months to come from today, June 6th, until the closing exhibition on December the 12th. By the time early November rolls around, we'll have everything up. To kick off the show, we wanted to highlight 6 specific artist contributions, and in the process, also avoid the unwanted experience of a virtual exhibition as a data dump, in case any of you are wondering why it is that we didn't put everything up at once. We also wanted and continue to want sustained engagement from you, our museum audience, as well as the important audiences that follow each of the fantastic artists that we have with us today, along with all the other major artists in this exhibition. Now, before I go any further and before I introduce the artists who are with us today, I'd like to ask our webmaster, Don, to keep doing what he's doing and to scroll through images while I talk, while I tell you a little bit more about the rationale behind this show. We'll get to hear from the artists we invited to the platform in a minute, but I want to set the table for at least some of the issues that are going to come up in the conversation. So bear with me for a minute while I do that. There's a phrase, oft-used phrase. In fact, it was the phrase that gave title to a recent Venice Biennial. May you live in interesting times. That is an English expression that has long masqueraded as the translation of a Chinese curse. It is not. Nonetheless, even if it's apocryphal and even if its formulation is entirely colonialist, it encapsulates the present condition like few other sayings. Despite being widely considered Confucian knowledge, which again, I affirm unequivocally it is not, this particular proto-globalist construction can first be attributed to the memoirs of a British ambassador to China between 1936 and 1937, but also to Frederick Rene Coudert Jr., who was a member of the US House of Representatives from 1947 to 1959. In 1936, Coudert Jr. wrote a letter to his friend Austen Chamberlain, the brother of the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, to express his view that the world was living through, quote, an interesting age, unquote. Chamberlain's response included the enduring and now obviously creolized phrase. Many years ago, he wrote, I learned from one of our diplomats in China that one of the principal Chinese curses heaped upon an enemy is, may you live in an interesting age. Surely, he continued in Coudert Jr.'s retelling, no age has been more fraught with insecurity than our own present time. Equipped though he was with powerful contacts, Coudert Jr. couldn't have known the half of it. The 20th century, which had already suffered through World War I, the so-called war to end all wars, marched ineluctably along its destructive path. Among the major conflicts that brought death and misery to millions were the Chinese Civil War, World War II, the Holocaust, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the conflagrations and coups engendered by the Cold War, the Persian Gulf War, the Balkan Wars, and the Rwandan genocide. The 21st century, alas, has brought more of the same. Our era's incarnation of interesting times consists of globalized civil unrest and political volatility that threatens the security of two of the world's wealthiest territories, the US and Western Europe. Regions that have since the 1970s remained largely immune to epidemics of chronic political instability until now. Enter the COVID-19 pandemic, a worldwide plague that has quarantined 2.6 billion people, or more than a third of the world's population. The current global health crisis has thrown the world's interdependence, interconnectedness, and vulnerability into stark relief. Borders have been shut down like metal gates. International travel has been stopped in its tracks. Lives have been turned upside down. Generations have readjusted their most basic expectations as entire societies have ground to a halt. Currently, the virus spreads while the world's scientists try desperately to catch up with its deadly effects, and the equally virulent spread of alternative facts, misinformation, and outright lies. In the US, the price of the lockdown, which is the only proven way to partially halt the spread of the virus, is intolerably high and climbing. As of this writing, 109,533 people have died from COVID-19 since February. 42.6 million are out of work, and millions more have been left to wonder anxiously when a working vaccine will arrive, and just as urgently, where their next paycheck will come from. Heaped atop this planetary emergency, like insult on injury, is a second US-centric pandemic. This one manifests as state-sanctioned police violence against Black and brown bodies. If that plague's original source can be traced back to the founding of the Republic, its newest outbreak has found its most recent expression in the wanton murder of George Floyd by 4 policemen in Minnesota, but also in the slow response of the state to bring his killers to justice, and an agonizing 9-minute video of his killing that throws into relief not just Mr. Floyd's cruel murder, but the lack of accountability that accompanies the death of Black and brown citizens at the hands of police in this country. At issue here, of course, is a second public health crisis, this one of longer standing. The anger at economic, social, and health disparities that fuels the protests that have roiled the US since George Floyd's death speaks for itself. It directly reflects the much higher COVID rates of COVID-19 deaths and illness among African Americans and people of color, such as Latino meat processing plant workers and immigrant farm workers. One public health expert, Eleanor Murray, assistant professor of epidemiology at Boston School of Public Health, recently put America's unavoidable dual pandemic reality in a nutshell. Last week, she said, all the news was about COVID. This week, all the news is about the protest. Really, these are two pieces of the same conversation. So what does this all have to do with art, some may ask? The answer, as provided by USFCAM's current online exhibition, Life During Wartime, Art in the Age of Coronavirus, is succinct. Everything, it has everything to do with art. The world is changing, and art is changing with it. Even if we acknowledge that the highest achievements of art cannot stem the rise of authoritarian governments, alleviate the fate of displaced people, safely relieve the constraints of a worldwide quarantine, or aid in discovering a new vaccine, art can, in its myriad manifestations, serve as an important guide for how to think, how to innovate, and most substantially live fully human lives during interesting times. As illustrated by the drawings, paintings, photographs, prints, collages, sculptures, videos, and performances featured on this dedicated platform, visual art proves once again, as it has countless times throughout history, that it can and will serve as a rallying cry, as a symbol of openness, as an evolving model for critical thought during periods in which dialogue and critical thought themselves are under attack. An online exhibition expressly designed for a time in which human contact is curtailed and physical exhibition making is nearly impossible, Life During Wartime provides a template for one way to carry on the work of an art museum during these interesting times. As such, this exhibition is devoted not just to making, sharing, promoting, and enabling discourse around visual culture at a computer screen, but to reconsidering, reorganizing, and maximizing those same possibilities. Among other things, we at USFCAM have realized about online exhibitions is the following. Besides displaying image of important works, they can also take us inside the lives, thoughts, and practices of the artists. This in turn provides opportunity for these same artists to make themselves heard while dialoguing with each other and with newly engaged audiences. Which brings me by way of closing to the words of the late Toni Morrison. In 2015, after despairing at the state of America and the world, the Nobel laureate wrote about the need for artists of all kinds to muscle through catastrophe. This is precisely the time when artists go to work, she wrote. There is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal. To Morrison's words, I'll add just two things. Artists obviously also do visual art. That, in Life During Wartime, was inspired in no small part by her example. Okay, now I'd like the artists to turn on their cameras and microphones so we can hear from them after they're introduced. Guys? We have 4 artists with us today, and they're with us from various parts of the country and the world. 2 other artists that have work up on the site, you'll notice, are not with us presently. Nusha Tavakolian, who, if you're looking at my screen now, is the upper left hand image, is in Tehran, and she's provided us a truly moving personal photographic essay on her experiences with COVID-19 in Iran. Unfortunately, she could not be with us today. A loved one is sick, and she is tending to them and maybe, hopefully, even listening. If you are, Nusha, a massive hello from us, and hope that your loved one gets better. You're not just here in spirit, but obviously also through your images and texts, which I repeat are extremely moving. Also not here with us today are Jake and Dean Chapman. Their new series, or the new suite, pardon me, of rectifications of Goya's Disasters of War are up on the website for you to peruse. The Chapman brothers have titled a new set of works, The Disasters of Yoga. There's humor to be had, I think, in this exhibition and this experience. Jake Chapman, with whom I've had the best email exchanges, will be with us in conversation on June 20th, if I remember correctly. So look out for an email announcing that conversation, which is coming up. Now I'd like to introduce our 4 artists. These will be brief introductions, since you can access their full bios and their work on their respective pages. First up is Basil Kincaid. Basil usually lives in St. Louis, Missouri. That's where he lives and works, but I believe he is now in Fredericktown, Missouri. He is a post-disciplinary artist. His gorgeous collage and quilts, which you'll see on his contribution page, can be seen in conceptual terms as an examination of 2 big ideas: reclamation and heritage. Despite his youth, he has exhibited all over the world and was the inaugural artist in residence at JP Morgan. Next is Cristina Lucas. Hello, Cristina.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good. Christina's joining us from Madrid today. Someone's doing an awful lot of banging, so I'm going to have to ask him to try and keep it down. Cristina is one of Spain's best-known artists. Her work is multidisciplinary and involves photography, video, drawing, sculpture, and installations. She's long been interested in exposing how power works, that comes in handy these days, by analyzing political and economic structures and dissecting the contradictions that appear between official history, reality, and collective memory. Next is Narsiso Martinez. Narciso joins us from Long Beach, California, I believe. Is that right, Narciso?
Right, that's correct.
Very good. Drawn from his own experiences as a farm worker, Narciso's work focuses on the people performing the labor necessary to fill produce sections and restaurant kitchens around the country. His portraits of farm workers are painted, drawn, and expressed to sculpture on discarded produce boxes that he basically lifts from grocery stores. It's tremendously impactful work, as you'll see on his page. His 2D and 3D work make visible the onerous conditions of the American farm worker, a strange idea in and of itself, seeing as the industry really depends on undocumented workers in this country. He was recently awarded the prestigious Daedalus Foundation MFA Fellowship, and his work has been exhibited at Long Beach University Art Museum, the Los Angeles Municipal Art Gallery, and the National Immigration Law Center. And finally, we have with us Spencer Tunick, who joins us from upstate New York, from Ramapo. Spencer's been documenting the live nude figure in public with photography and video since 1990. He's organized 95 temporary site-related installations that encompass dozens, hundreds, or frankly thousands of volunteers, and his photographs are records of these events. His body of work has helped define or at least clarify the social, political, legal issues surrounding art in the public sphere. In May 2000, the Second U.S. District Court sided with him, recognizing that his work was protected by the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. On June 3rd of the same year, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in his favor and against Mayor Rudy Giuliani of New York in the same landmark case. Go Spencer. His site-specific installations have been commissioned by the Biennial of Sao Paulo, the 25th Biennial of Sao Paulo, MoCA Cleveland, Vienna Kunsthal, and Mambo, which is the Museum of Modern Art, Bogota, among others. Welcome, guys. Thank you so much for being here. I'm not quite sure what that whistling sound is or what the banging is, but if one of you, because it's just the four of us on, so if there's a way for you guys to control that, let's try it. Let's try and get a hold of that. Well, listen, there's a lot to talk about, but I'm sort of interested in maybe opening up with Basil. Don, while we ask Basil the first question to get this thing rolling, can you dial up his page so we can look at his work? Basil.
Hey.
How you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm as good as I can be in all the present circumstances.
Well, speaking of the present circumstances, I mean, I want to ask you a couple of questions, which I think will roll out to everybody, because there's a point at which everybody's experiences are similar, but obviously not the same. So I sort of want the audience to hear from real live artists, obviously, which is why you're here, but I want them to know what it's been like working throughout the pandemic. So when mid-March, when St. Louis basically sort of issues the lockdown, what happens to you? What happens to your working process? What happens to your practice?
So yeah, when it first hit, I felt like I'm a naturally kind of introverted person, and I spend a lot of time alone already as it is. Making art takes time, and so unless I'm doing it with other people, it just involves a lot of alone time. So when they first announced it, I'm like, okay, this will be easy. Like I'm built for this. I've been training for this. And I kept thinking to myself, like, at first, this will be great. Like, this will be a time where I can kind of stretch out, and get a lot done, since, I'll still have access to, my materials and everything. And I pretty quickly realized that, trying to push myself extra hard to be even more productive was, just kind of like an unrealistic expectation to place on myself. And I realized, pretty quickly also that I think a lot of artists deal with this kind of like self-imposed pressure. And I mean, maybe it's all, since capitalism is the way it is, you feel this like pressure to be productive and like, make a name for yourself or whatever. And I realized that like for the last 5 years, at least, I've been just pedal to the metal, nonstop, art 24/7, like putting it in front of everything. And so, as the first couple, actually even that first week passed, I just kind of shifted into restoration mode, and I realized that like this time period for me has been a lot about like giving myself space to feel things that I suppressed with work and feel things that I had, just pushed down so that I could keep going and didn't acknowledge. So it's been a major like healing time period for me.
Have you been able to work?
Trying to be as restful as I can, really.
Right. Okay. So you basically sort of you've concentrated on the restful aspect of it.
Yeah, and then I have been making art, but my relationship to it has changed a little bit. Whereas, like, you know, before I would like kind of press myself to do X amount of hours a day, like 8 or 10 hours of studio time and a couple hours of administrative time. And now it's like I'm only making art when I feel like it. And I'm like, instead of like pressing myself to do it like a job. And I'm noticing that it feels more playful. And I'm like, just, you know, things take longer, but I'm enjoying the art making even more. So
let me ask you something. Sorry to cut you off. I mean, look, we've had sort of these 2 lockdowns, right? And in St. Louis, the second lockdown went into effect on June the 2nd. Did that change anything for you in terms of sort of the way you're locked in your house, or you're locked in, and I'm imagining with access to your studio, correct?
Yeah, so I mean, I work from home. Like what would normally be like a dining room and living room is like a big, you know, open room studio. So I, you know, work there from home, but it has changed because it's different. Like I'm so thankful to have a yard. I can like get outside and, you know, get in the grass and exercise and whatnot. But yeah, like it has changed where like since I'm home all the time, like it's harder to kind of, I don't know, differentiate work and living space. I don't know why it shifted so quickly, but like, you know, I noticed I'm like working in bed a lot, like drawing in bed, or I'll pull like for these collages, I'll pull the cutting board into bed and kind of just be like, you know, it feels like making art as a kid, just doing it all over the house, kind of just for fun.
James Joyce wrote Ulysses in bed, so it seems perfectly legal to me.
Yeah.
Cristina, you haven't had access to a yard because I know you're in Madrid, which was one of the first places to be hit by the coronavirus. The second country actually going to, well, the third, if you could count China, obviously China, then Italy, the second country in Europe to go on lockdown. In fact, I saw you shortly before Spain went into lockdown, but you don't have access to a yard, I think, right?
Yeah, right.
Did you have access to your studio?
No, until last week.
Okay.
But I've been working at home. I work at home a lot. I work on the computer. So I was working here and just making digital things. But to tell you the truth, I couldn't really work much. I was just very focused on reading new things because most of my close project has been postponed. And so there are some projects that they keep we keep the appointment, but for November and September, and you know, for the moment I'm just reading.
By projects you mean exhibitions, right?
Yeah, exhibitions with the new production or things like that. But you know, it's very risky now. Nobody knows what's going on and what happens with this weird situation. But then it's very interesting to see how the community from the whole world are just making a very interesting essays about this global situation. So I've been reading a lot and thinking. I cannot really make art pieces extremely connected to this weird moment because I feel myself like in the middle of an accident. This is a big crash, like a big, very, very tough situation that we cannot even think very much what is going on, just to be able to, for me, what I'm doing is just to keep working on the project that they were already, you know, in the way. But I think that the consequences of this situation of coronavirus and the pandemic, the world, the economy, all these things are going to be very, very protagonist of the near future. And then I think I will be able to go through it in a way. But for the moment, I'm not doing work extremely connected to this situation, because to me it's something this is still going on.
You haven't gotten your head around it yet, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, but see, this is an interesting thing to talk about with the four of you, because half of the exhibition thus far, half of the contributions that have come in and that the audience will be able to see, the public will be able to see down the line, about half of the work is work that was done basically from the start of the pandemic, basically in January or even early December for people who are in China, to today, right? And the other half of the work that's up on the website is work that is older, of an older vintage, and that gets kind of recontextualized, somehow resignified. And in fact, for you, Cristina, both of the works that we have up, and I want to pull up to the anarchist image, Don, if we can, and have Cristina talk to us about that a little bit. Cristina, that image, that work of yours is from 2004 and from a series called The Old Order, correct?
Correct. And this is very beautiful, how we can co-curate the pieces from the past, and how they can really be very pertinent and very interesting for this moment, because this work, for instance, The Anarchist, it belongs to this series that you mentioned, and was coming from the feminist background, from my feminist background, thinking about this idea of the personal is political, and of course the political is also personal. And so this is a series of women that live at home in the intimacy of in the privacy, and they are performing kind of conceptual political approach. So this is The Anarchist, and this old lady, as in The Anarchist, dressed on red and black with a Molotov cocktail, about to destroy this old order, this very boring situation, the previous order, about to destroy it. It's quite pertinent right now. It's quite interesting right now.
It really is. It almost gets a second life. But the curious thing for me, Cristina, and for everybody else involved, is that it's not just Dave Hammond's work or Francisco Goya's work that gets recontextualized. It's work that was done by you guys. It's not just the history. It's not just looking at Guernica again and it having many lives. It's much of the work that we have up on our platform. This is recent history, yet it has a slightly different, though very similar life, as it did back in 2004. Spencer, I want to go to you for a minute, because you have a practice that you've basically rolled out of doing these massive installations with new bodies. And as I mentioned in my intro, you've really tested the limits of the nude body, of the human body out in public, right? But the whole COVID thing hit you like a ton of bricks. I mean, it hit everybody like a ton of bricks, but it hit you creatively. It hit you right, as it were, in the practice, right? So I want you to explain to people what you had to go through to put together the images that you have up now, and how that literally changed everything that you do.
Right. Well, excuse me. Thank you for inviting me to be in this exhibition, Christian, and also thank you to be included with all the artists on this live stream. I'm pretty honored for that. I was warning my friends and family through text messages when the virus hit Italy and left China, and I was buying supplies and telling friends and family to buy supplies in case they were they were quarantined for 2 to 3 weeks. And so I was sort of this crazy
Optimist.
yeah. And people would like take me off this feed, you know, they didn't want to hear from me. And then the person that said, take me off this feed left New York in a flight, you know, 2 days later with his whole family in a rush and panic before they closed down the flight. So, and then an exhibition I was in was postponed, a biennial in Denmark, Socle du Monde, was postponed to 2001. And then I realized, well, my work as it exists could quite be over, that people could not lie or stand shoulder to shoulder, that, that this series that I spent over 25 years working on and is what I love doing is finished. And yeah, I was very, I mean, that's the least of people's problems, you know, but as far as, you know, there's many problems going, you know, when this started out, you know, through sickness and fear and misinformation and false information. But as far as artistically, if we separate everything just to working in the image itself, my work basically was halted and might not be able to exist in the future as it does now.
But tell everyone how you actually sort of went about doing it, because you went from actually using real live people in groups, which is clearly what you can't do anymore. How you reimagine your work, your entire practice.
Right. So I've always wanted to do a work by video conferencing and virtually, but it takes a lot of organization. And people think because I work with hundreds and sometimes thousands of naked people that I have like an army of assistants. And I work alone in a studio here. I don't have any assistants. And so I thought I wasn't going to be working during this time and making art. And then a group of artists from the Yucatan in Mexico, an arts group called Studio 333, contacted me and asked me, had I ever thought of doing video photographs over group video chats? And I said, yes, but I can't do it myself. And they said they were willing to help me. And so I put together an invitation for people to register to show their interest. They would need to send a photograph of themselves and also a statement on why they wanted to participate in this project in these times of isolation and quarantine. And so people wrote their stories in, which are listed on my exhibition page, which is a great thing, because that's what I planned for the works to be shown with the statements. And then people signed up from, I have a list of around 100,000 people who want to pose for me from all over the world. So
wait, can I read one of these?
Oh, sure.
Okay, so it attached, actually it doesn't attach to any one particular image. They're basically, the images live independently of the comments on the page and in terms of your project. But this one came in from someone who's anonymous, but is a nurse in Australia, 36 years old, female. And she says, I'm a nurse. I feel like people are feeling scared and more disconnected than ever. I feel like this is an opportunity to reach out and be part of something bigger, even bigger than the local community. She's talking obviously about your project, your photographic project that you're doing through teleconferencing. It's a global community. Life is too short to stress about the naked body. And this is the kicker, especially when your job is swabbing COVID patients. This is very powerful stuff.
Yeah, I think, many of the participants, some were first responders, some were nurses working in the emergency room, and so I had heroes posing for me. So in a way, this was the people coming together, not only who were everyday people and artists participating, but what this work sort of became sort of a artistic distraction for communal escape. And for this nurse who participated, or who is also, and others who are going to participate. So it was very fulfilling for me to feel that not only could I make work, but the work could continue to be sort of this act of healing. And so I'm just very honored to be able that all these people signed up, including someone from Syria and Pakistan and countries where if they had been naked in public, they probably would have been arrested.
Right, correct. Narciso, you there? I can't see your image. Is Narciso on? Well, are you there?
Hello?
Narciso, hey man, how are you?
All right, all right.
Good. Look, Narciso, we were mentioning that look, we've all had, everyone in the entire world has had plans postponed, canceled, changed, basically thrown into the rubbish heap. I know that you had things canceled, but you also have had things happen. You have a show up now, if I'm correct, at a gallery in Los Angeles at Charlie James, right?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
Good. So, tell us about that show. Tell us about the work that's on there.
Well, it all started right before the official lockdown. I worked really hard the few months previous to the exhibition just to get everything ready, and just maybe a few days before the shelter in place officially took place, it was going to be the opening. So there was no opening, but everything got ready to be shown. Obviously, there was no reception, but
the work is up on the walls. Actually, first, tell us what the work consists of. I said
Yeah.
a little something about it, but I want you to talk about it.
Yeah, the work is pretty much a continuation of the conversation I started maybe a couple of years ago when I after I graduated from Cal State Long Beach. I started this idea of representing farm workers, and which in the very beginning of stages was about working class. So because I had to, in order to pay my college tuition, I work in the fields. So for me, the working class was the farm working community.
Wait. I want you to repeat what you just said. What? That to pay for your college, you did what?
Oh yeah, in order to pay for college tuition, I had to work in the fields for all my college years, which was like about maybe 9 or 10 years. So all those, that idea of all those experiences that I learned in the fields, I wanted to bring it together in the artwork that I started to produce, and in the way I came across, or it came across the idea of representing farm workers on produce cardboard boxes, so that we will have that conversation between farm workers and the whole agricultural industry. And it's been taking various forms from its beginnings, from portraits of farm workers to scenes of performing the actual tasks, and these landscapes, or agricultural landscapes, or images of farm workers getting together and having lunch. And this is all like images, memories that I have from those 10 years or so that I work in seasonally in the fields. And the exhibition Super Fresh now at Charlie James Gallery, which closes on the 13th, in which is only open by appointment, I believe. It's like I said, it's like a continuation of it, but it also talks a little bit about how, like, I kind of wanted to wrap up how this all started by me going to college and then working in the fields and then questioning why is it that people have different lifestyles in the fields, or people who work in the fields versus people who own the orchards, and then finally understanding how the system works and why, and kind of like, okay, now this is how it works, so I'm gonna bring these two together. But then this is, how is it that I came to understand this? And so I understood that because I went to college, I was able to see how it works and why is it that sometimes farm workers don't realize their own situations, because I didn't realize while I started working in the fields, why is it that I was working in the fields? But because I understood how everything works, I decided to switch my landscape paintings to the actual representation of farm workers on these quote unquote canvases, right? And so that we can spark conversations about it.
Right. At a time, I want to point out when immigrant farm workers are being sort of particularly victimized, right? While they're being deemed essential workers, right? These are among our essential workers, according to the government.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I've been drawing portraits of farm workers with bandanas on, and sometimes without the bandanas. Obviously, these all are with different contexts around it. Why is it that they wear bandanas? Why is it that they don't wear bandanas? And I can go on this path and talk about it. But I also, when I learned, I also, because of the lockdown, I've been keep working, and I keep in touch actually with some of my coworkers from the fields. And on one of the conversations I had with one of my coworkers, he sent me a bunch of images because now it's asparagus season, and he sent me a bunch of images, and I actually asked him, why is it that he's not wearing a mask in this time where like everybody's talking about the spread of the coronavirus, and especially now that they are deemed essential workers and they should be protected, and they are not. And he was like, well, nobody talks about it here in the fields, and like nobody tells us anything, and so I guess I don't even want to say in their defense, but like I know that picking asparagus doesn't require it to be next to each other, but I've been seeing and following the news, and there are so many orchards around the same orchards that I worked on that actually do work within short distance of each other, and they still not wearing
masks,
any kind of personal protection.
Right.
So they started marching and protesting, and so because of that, I did a piece questioning this. Is it gonna be like after going to quote unquote the new normal? Are they gonna be protected, or is it gonna be just the noise and it's gonna go away and we're gonna go?
And Narciso, is that fresh cut, which is on your page, or is that another work?
Right. That's a fresh cut. The beginning of a new day, I believe it's titled. Yeah.
Right. Basil, because we started with you, we didn't get to talk about any one of your pieces. So Don, if we can go to Basil's page.
The one that we have that I made during this time period is the one called Touch.
Lovely.
It's one of the collages.
Yeah.
So this work I have been making this piece during the shelter in place. And I guess this time period, like what has really come to the forefront for me is like thinking about love and intimacy and my family members, lovers that I've had over time, people that stuck with me, and just also just thinking about like taking the time to kind of like heal my heart. And like there's all this memories and emotions and things that, I think it's easy to suppress things over time. And, there had been a long time where my art kind of was an escape in a lot of ways from any number of different things. And I have been thinking about this time period, like just shifting some of the way I use my art and have it be more emotionally driven. And that's been kind of a trend over the last few years, but leading up to, we only have one from this series, but I'm doing this series of collages just around like intimacy and, what's it like to develop this relationship with your own body, and like unlocking memory that's in the body. Like I feel like so often in my own personal experience, when I try to evaluate where I was emotionally or psychologically at a particular time, you do it from this kind of brain perspective, like thinking back through the events. But recently I've been more interested in tapping into those sensations through my body. So like different movement practices and, just developing this kind of language
You
with
do.
my...
I think you do a lot of yoga. I mean, I follow you on Instagram. So
Yeah, I do yoga, mobility, drills, I lift, I dance. I try to just engage my body in a number of different ways. Recently, I guess yoga has been kind of not as much, but I do, I'm engaged in a number of different movement practices, and moving my body has been like, just extremely like healing and transformative for me. Just emotionally. And I feel like in this time period too, that's something that's been kind of like a bedrock for my sanity, is like cooking and exercising and dancing in the yard. So just thinking about those things, like what makes you feel at home in your own body, and then how does isolation amplify in some areas your connection to certain people at time periods, and just kind of looking at like what am I feeling, and kind of letting it come out in the paper. But yeah, this is one that I made during this time.
let me actually. I'm going to ask two questions. One is technical. Can you guys still see me? Because for some reason
I can't see you, but I can hear you.
All right, fine. You know what? Let's just stick with hearing me for the time being. Technical problems, but we'll get over them, and the fact that we can hear each other is plenty fine. I wanted to dial back to a piece that's actually the first piece on the page.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that piece. It's
awaiting instruction.
No, net pay, net gain.
Oh yeah. Okay, sorry. Yeah,
this one. Because I think it's a great story. There's a great story that accompanies that.
Yeah. So this body of work was a body of work that I did for a solo show last year in London with Carl Costial. But the body of work itself, I'm glad we're getting to talk about this now that I think about it, because it kind of ties into this time period now. But I guess I need to give like a brief little bit of backstory for this to make sense. So quilting has been a part of my family tradition for generations and generations, and has been a part of the Black cultural tradition, ever since, we were brought here and, kind of forced to experience winter. So the combination of like being forced into climates that are not, I mean, I actually feel that Black people aren't supposed to experience winter. Like the psychological toll that winter has on me, I feel like, we're supposed to be in the sun. But at any rate, we started making quilts from the scraps of clothes. Clothes get old, you take the good parts and save them and make them into quilts. Somebody dies, you take their old clothes and make them into quilts to memorialize that person and encapsulate some of their energy so that you can still feel that love. In the past couple years, I've been thinking about how there's been, I mean, this line of thought has been in my mind for a long time, but has kind of evolved over time. And in the last couple years, I've been thinking about how there's this really unbroken link from slavery time till now of basically disregard for Black life, but value of Black labor and cultural products. And then that is also in concert with the prison industrial complex and tied into the police brutality that we see ongoing that hasn't stopped since the inception of America as it is. And so this piece, I'm thinking about how quilting was and is a tradition of joy in the face of continual subjugation and pain. So, I think about how the same people that were picking the cotton that our money is printed on are the same people that built the foundation for the wealth that the United States experiences, and that made the United States at one point a global power. That is an extension of the labor extracted from Black people. And so I thought it would be interesting, since the money is technically a paper, a fabric. It reads as a paper, but it's technically a fabric. It's made out of cotton and linen. I wanted to really bring the juxtaposition of joy and pain like right to the forefront. So like I took this practice of joy, the quilt making, and made it with money, which is to me directly tied to the captivity of Black people. But then we're sold this vision that like with enough money, you can be free and treated like a human being. But we see time and time again that that's not the case. So with the name Net Pain, Net Gain, it's like we get fed this myth of meritocracy, where it's like if you work hard enough and if you dress a certain way and talk a certain way and present yourself a certain way and basically jump through all these hoops of white boundary, that you'll be treated like a whole human being, which is never the case. So the series is kind of looking at how like the American dream is like this delusion that is sold to us basically to keep us distracted from the fact that like no matter where we are, you're still kind of like free range slave to me. That's how I feel like is my personal experience as a Black person in the United States.
Well, look, man, we can make several feature films from very nasty clips that we've, police violence just from the last 9 days. But we're right about the time where we should take some questions from the audience. Before we do that, I want to ask all four of you guys, if you, I'm sure you've got things that you want to get off your chest and things that you want to say. Things we've all been locked down for months, man. And it occurs to me that
one of the few things that we have, or that we've had these last few months, are these, I don't know, this virtual reality, which is actually not so virtual anymore. You know, virtual has had this aspect of being both digital and simulacra, and the whole simulacra part of it kind of gone. It's not really simulacra if we're actually talking and having an exchange, and more importantly, being able to put an exhibition together. It is our reality. So I wonder, you know, for all four of you, and whoever wants to chime in first, you know, tell us how you feel about that. We're no longer doing things with objects, at least in terms of our exchange of information, or our cultural exchange. You know, I think, Cristina, you said that you haven't been able to work because you're basically processing, because that's your process. Spencer, you basically had to readapt everything and you went right back to it. Basil, you've worked. Narciso, you've got work up. One work was inspired by the thing. If this pandemic, which is going to continue, you know, rolls out in another 3 months, where are you guys going to be? What do you think? Where do you think you guys are going to be creatively? And while you answer, I'm switching to the other computer, which appears to work now.
I guess I'll jump in, just, you know, to get out there. One thing that, you know, I guess has proven over time for me is that no matter what the state of the art market is, I'll always make art in some way. If materials and, you know, I make collages, if they stop making magazines, you know, I mean, I'll make art out of sticks, you know, like art is something that makes me feel alive. And so even if my imaginary friends are the only audience for it, that's enough for me to want to be creative in some form. So I don't know what it'll look like, but I know that, like, you know, I'll be making art until I die. Just you know, that. Yeah, so I guess that's my 2 cents on it. I don't know what it'll look like, but I'll be doing it.
Go
Sorry.
ahead.
Thank you. For me, it depends how long does it take, this pandemic situation, but I have the necessity of making things with my hands, because basically my work is quite digital. I can make very long research and to work on it and to get data and to put them together. But I have the necessity of doing things with my hands. So maybe I'll turn into a painter or something. Who knows?
That'll be exciting.
Well, I think I agree with Basil, and I think I would just keep creating things. I mean, I don't see I don't see how I don't see myself not doing art. You know, I don't see myself not drawing. I pretty much draw every day, even if it's like a line a day or 2 lines a day. But I try to keep this everyday practice. I mean, I draw on cardboard. I feel like I can find cardboard anywhere. There is always, and my work is very figurative, so there's people everywhere. Yeah, I mean, regardless, whether it's online or on the streets or as a mural format or as an installation format, I feel like I always keep doing art as well. Yeah.
Well, we're still making culture, right? We're still talking about culture. We're still trading in it. I mean, you know, even when we talk about the art market, and frankly, you know, look, you need money to make anything go around, for things to be healthy. So I'm all for the market had many excesses. Now those are, I think, obviously going to disappear. But we all need to pay our bills, and so that's fundamental. But where I'm going with this is that, yes, even through this means, even through this digital means, even through screens, it's possible to continue to work. It's fundamental to continue to work. I don't want to take Spencer's last thoughts away. So Spence, you got anything to add?
I wake up at 4:30 every morning with revenge fantasies on my mind. I just want to use my privilege to activate the masses to protest and create art actions. I'm not so much, you have artists like great artists like Matthew Barney and that kind of delve into with their group works. They delve into the sexual, gender, and organisms, and I just want to take my energy and be political with it. I just I know that my work aggravates the right and conservatives, and my work also aggravates the left. So I keep on taking the punches, but I feel like just real quick, I just noticed that there was a protest in Israel against Netanyahu, and the protest had everyone was separated by 6 feet, and they were all wearing masks. They were of course clothed, but that gave me the idea that people want to, even in these times, get outside and protest. And if COVID gets worse, I think people will still protest. So I'm thinking about possibly getting outside again and doing a work with social distancing, nude, maybe in New York or possibly down south.
I think that sounds brilliant. And just to sort of wrap up before we go to Noel and ask for questions, look, I'm remembering an email that I got from Basil or a text, I don't remember which, where he said where you said, Basil, that you were in a state of constant grief. I think that's mostly the way we all feel, right? I think it's not just us who are sitting in this panel. I'm sure the audience feels that way. And I think the publics plural feel that way. I think we're in a planetary moment of great grief. But for that very reason, I think it's fundamental that we keep on owning. We keep on working, we keep on doing stuff, we keep on writing, we keep on making art. We take Toni Morrison's injunction to heart, as you guys have done, and as we've been able to do with the show, or at least try to. So anyway, thank you guys so much for being here. Maybe we'll take some questions now. Noel, if you can.
Yes, hi. Thank you guys for such a great discussion. First, I'd like to remind people we are getting some questions. Please, if you're on Zoom, put your questions into Q&A. And if you're on Facebook Live, put them into the comment section. Okay, so our first question is for Narsiso. These works are all beautifully provocative. Congratulations to Christian and each of those 4 artists. And then we have the question: do you anticipate the very recent events involving Mr. George Floyd impacting your upcoming works? If so, how? Darker, more political, or more hopeful? And this is a question too that other people can answer after Narsiso.
I feel. Could you say the question again? I feel like there is a misunderstanding.
Oh, sure. So this person wants to know if you that anticipate the very recent events involving Mr. George Floyd impacting your upcoming works. If so, how? Will they be darker, more political, more hopeful?
Is my imagination, or there is a misunderstanding? I don't see how I foresaw the recent events with Mr. Floyd in my work. My work is about farm workers. Maybe this person is talking about like how the people I represent are covered with masks and bandanas on their faces, and therefore it looks like they are protesters, or somehow is that, I'm not sure. If that's the case, then is totally because I have had those comments before, like way before when I started the series of masked masked portraits, where people would ask me why I was representing protesters or gangsters. But in reality, they are actually farm workers who are protecting themselves from the harsh weather conditions in the fields, or for the pesticides or chemical residues on the branches, and that's what they are wearing their masks and bandanas. But I can see how people can relate those images to the recent events. Yeah.
But listen, I think the question was basically sort of tossed out at everyone, and
okay.
whether it impacts your work specifically in a declarative way. I think it's entirely possible that, again, the grief I spoke about a minute ago might inform your sense of, I don't know, instability or political injustice. It expands it out from, I think, possibly, and I'm not just charging you with this, Narciso, from the depictions that you make, I don't know, to just make them deeper or make them, I mean, they're insanely deep now, but what I mean to say is that I think that sense of grief becomes far more profound, and I think that basically affects all of us, so whether or not it shows up specifically in each of your works. If there's anybody else who wants to comment on that, go ahead. And if not, we'll go.
I'll say something. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, thank you. I think that something very special is going on with the George Floyd all over the world. It's very interesting to me how this issue could be like a particular issue, like a local issue, an issue that it's affecting a determined society, part of the society. But now it grows that much that we feel part of a bigger community. Actually, globalization is quite key thing in this pandemic situation, and how this is affecting all of us is really putting all together against this terrible action, and how it has been expanded through also Europe and some other places. And so being part of a community not based on the nations, not based on the states, based on empathy in a way. So I think it's quite beautiful and interesting. It's special.
I got an email from a friend of mine when a friend of mine in Santiago, Chile, when the protest kicked off, right? And the usual question that we all ask each other, and in fact we've all asked each other, I think, these questions several times through the pandemic and now through these protests, are how are you? What's going on, right? And my answer was, Rome is burning. And in fact, I think one of the fundamental things that we need to get used to is that we are Rome. There are protests in London, there are protests in Paris, there are protests in Australia, for Christ's sake, because this impacts everyone. And okay, Narciso may not turn around, or he may, who knows, turn around tomorrow and depict African Americans on, if not produce boxes somewhere else, but it doesn't matter. The fact is that the screw was turned one more time, and we're all feeling this. And that's unavoidable.
Well, yeah, because I mean, I think something that's like really stood out for me, watching, different people's response to this time period, is that like, this is nothing new. Like, Black people,
it's new. No, it's
indigenous
not
people, like, are exterminated by the police and by vigilantes on a daily basis. Like, I mean, there's numbers proving that it's like less than every 24 hours, a Black person is either abducted or murdered by a police or vigilante. So, I mean, we have Black women disappearing on a daily basis, you know, and they're never found. And I feel like the reason we're seeing such a global response is because, look, like, art has allowed me to travel the whole world. I've been all over Europe. I've been to Japan. I've been to the continent. And one thing is for sure is that wherever you go, where there's white people, Black people get treated the same way. Like, you get treated like shit in France, you get treated like shit in the United States. And so, you know, as an effect of this global structure of white supremacy, people are tired. It's in the United States, this has been 400 plus years of degradation on a daily basis. So you have compound psychological trauma, genetic trauma, and I think that it's odd. I'm thankful for it, but I also think that it's odd that it takes for people to see like live video of a person being murdered to realize that we have a problem. I'm glad that you know veil is being pulled back, but I feel like, you know, I'm thankful for COVID in the sense that, like, hopefully people are sitting at home with time to introspect on their role that they play in these different structures, you know, because it is systemic, but systems are also made of people. And so, you know, like, if this is, I mean, I guess this is to whoever's watching it, this is something new to you and you didn't realize that, you know, Black people are being treated differently and that we're being murdered and abducted. I'm thankful that this is a wake-up call, and I hope that it stimulates you to, you know, do your homework, you know, examine like how you fit into these roles, like what areas where have you been complacent, and look at this time period and look at yourself and be like, what am I doing to make this better on a daily basis for my fellow human being? Like, you know, Christina, you mentioned something profound about empathy. And I think that we all need to like dig really deep. And, you know, like, to the question of how will it change, you know, your art, like, no matter what, as a Black artist, my art is going to be contextualized within the framework of all of these things. And so, you know, you look back to the time when Michael Brown was murdered in St. Louis, and the same question comes up of how will this change your art? And at that time period, for me, like, you know, 2012, 2013, I mean, I'm getting emotional just thinking about it, but
Get emotional, man.
focused more on, you know, on that pain and trauma. And, you know, then I realized that I don't like for people to be consuming that work, and I don't like selling, I don't like dealing in pain. So when you look at my work, like, it's focused around joy and the resilience of the Black spirit, where like we face this daily degradation and are still triumphantly beautiful. We still engage in love, and I just think that that's a beautiful thing, that like, despite every effort to tear us down, like you can't. And even when we're exterminated, it makes all of us stronger, even though the pain is that much greater. So I guess what I want to leave with is that, like, this isn't new, and it's not going to stop until there's a critical mass of white people examining their own behaviors and taking action to confront, you know, all your local and otherwise legislators and push for policies to change. I mean, all of this stuff is written on paper, designed to hold Black people back. So you have people for hundreds of years running around the track, and then Black people get the firing pistol, and you say, why are you losing the race? Well, you know, oftentimes, like, I like the analogy, I mean, you know, people use like, pull yourself up by your own bootstrap, you know, well, we don't have boots. And so it's time for, you know, the people with boots to share them, or, you know, like it's like Spencer said, you have to leverage the privilege that you have in every capacity. to make things better for everybody else. Because one thing to me that COVID has pointed out that I feel like people are not still fully grasping yet is that like we have to learn how to come together as all of humanity, because there are threats that face us all, even though we're all impacted differently. And even though like COVID is showing the gap in resources and the gap in privilege, and it's exposing how where people have access to different resources and not as things shift. So I think we need to look at like, how can we become ever more selfless? And how can we learn about other people's experiences and step by step become more empathetic and change the way we interact with each other and the systems that we form together?
Well, the thing about COVID, man, is, and I've been saying this for a bit, that it's like mercury. You know, it slips into every fissure of society, and it exposes it. It exposes it, and it actually sort of expands it. And this is where we are. You know, I think as Americans, we're generally not used to, particularly white Americans, folks with incomes above a certain level, of being as exposed as we are now. So I think you're onto something with the idea that maybe the pandemic sort of like set the table for a certain level of empathy that we couldn't have had before March. Let's hope that's the case. Let's hope that's the case, you know. But personally, as a child, I lived somewhere where society fell apart, and it changed my life forever. Among other things, I'm here. And you know, it's fundamental that we understand how fragile society is. It really is that fragile, and it can fall apart, you know, tomorrow. People often, when they talk about wars and the way they happen, and in fact, I was just reading Camus' The Plague this morning, or rereading it. There's a character who says, you know, how stupid wars are. But of course, that's what everyone says before they happen, and even the minute they happen. How stupid it is that this could happen. It will be taken care of. And of course it doesn't. The nature of war, the nature of oppression is stupid. But what's stupider is that we don't get to actually rethink the propositions, the structures that get us there in the first place. There's another question that I want maybe Noelle to go to, because I'm looking at it now about the title, just to sort of like clear something up.
I thought that would be a good, So,
Yeah.
So this question is about the title, and it is for Christian. And it goes, why the need to tie these moments to war? Something that strikes me is the military language used throughout the world during the pandemic. Do you think there is another way of framing these times?
That's an excellent question. And I'll tell you what, this show is called Life During Wartime, not because I am talking about guns and ammo or intended to talk about guns and ammo and tanks or police on the streets. We thought up this title in this exhibition a month and a half ago when we were only dealing with the pandemic. What I was thinking about was a Talking Head song. This ain't no party, this ain't no disco, this ain't no fooling around. That seemed to me an apt description of the pandemic then. Little did I know that the war metaphor would be so much more apt today, and unfortunately it is, and that's where we're at. So that's my answer. Blame David Byrne, and then, you know, blame the rest of us for sort of picking it up. But it just seems just cruelly fitting right now. Any other questions?
Oh, okay. We have a question for Cristina related to the personal and the political. Cristina, how closely do you orchestrate the images, such as the anarchist one? Or do you work collaboratively, such with the woman depicted in the anarchist photo? Or do you work with, do you work with the woman or her family members? In other words, do you collaborate with people to make these images?
That's a beautiful question, because this work is from 2004. So talking to Christian, we decided to show in this context because a second lecture is quite interesting now. But at that time, I was using my family's relatives and everybody. So the anarchist actually is my mother-in-law, and so is the mother of my partner, and she's old enough to have a background in the Spanish Civil War. She was quite young, of course, but of course she knows perfectly what the role she was playing. And the autarky is she's my sister. So the apartment is my apartment when I was having a residency in New York in the ISCP 2004, and then my sister came and I decided to take this picture with my sister flying on the kitchen, just very close to have a big to smash on the floor. And so that's the title of this anarchist autarky, sorry. That it's also interesting, the autarky, because now with this problem of asking for material and asking for your mask and asking for all those important aspects that we have been needed for the pandemic situation, we have been talking very much about autarkism. So how to not be connected, too dependent of some other countries. So that's why we decided to use these two photographs. But everybody on this series, photograph series, is they have a very close connection to me.
Interesting. Ready for another question?
Yes, please.
Okay, this question is for Basil. And can you talk about the irony of sewing money into a quilt, which typically has the utility of keeping someone warm?
Yeah. So that's actually something I wrote a little bit about at the time period. With that, I was thinking about a few things. One in particular being about how we look at craft versus fine art. And so when you look at quilt making within the realm of craft, they sell for way less than, what art quilts can sell for. So I was thinking about how when you extract the utility from an object, how that changes the reception and the perception of value of, that object. So when you think about people, and I'm thinking about Black people in particular, when you look at us from one particular context, say the framework that the media may give you about how Black people are, they construct a framework where you look at Black people within one particular context and subscribe them like a particular value. Whereas normally when I break this down, I'm on a podium somewhere. So I use the analogy of if I'm on stage here at this institution, you look at me a particular way and receive me with a certain level of value. But if you just see me on the corner as just any random Black person, then you get this flood of pre-programmed images that change the way you value me as a human being. So with the quilt in particular, one thing I would say when I was posting about that show and posting about those pieces was that the money quilt doesn't keep you warm. And I think about how earlier in my career, I was so obsessed with this idea of becoming successful that I, kind of overlooked the value of other things and people in my life. And I took things for granted. And I remember a time period where when I guess my career first started taking off, and I realized I was making all this money, but it didn't make me happy. And so that's kind of the money quilt. It doesn't keep you warm. I'd rather have the things that keep me warm in a pinch than money. So that's kind of the conversation between the two. And there's that juxtaposition between like the task of quilt making as a space of joy versus labor. So it's like, joy and labor. And then for me as an artist, there's that Venn diagram of, how can I maximize the joy, but at the same time, like I have to make art now because it's like my only source of income. So it's like this tension between joy and labor. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense to me. I mean, the one thing about crises also, man, is that like, and I think we all know this, right? Is that it boils everything down to the essential, right? We begin to rethink everything. Our dreams, our expectations, our relationships with friends, family, with authority figures. Maybe they're not authority figures any longer, or not in the same way. All these relationships get re-examined as they have to. Are there any other questions?
We do. We have a question that any or all of you could answer. I'm sure our viewers would be interested. A question from Instagram. What is your advice for young artists and young activists today?
I'll let you guys take that on.
I can maybe say something. And I hope this is Malcolm X's quote, but because you don't know with the internet these days.
You don't know.
And
read it. If it's good, read it.
And I, for one, will join in with anyone. I don't care what color you are, as long as you want to change this miserable condition that exists on this earth. So I guess what that means is that you can use your privilege to activate your art protest, your art action for others, and just be knowledgeable of the history of what you're talking about. And but you can cross, I think. I mean, what do you think, Narsiso and Basil? You can cross into the idea that we are all equal as artists, trying to fight against the machine.
Yeah, I think too it's important, don't be afraid to make mistakes. I think sometimes when you're entering a new space, I mean, I see this often, like you end up doing nothing instead of something because you're afraid you'll do the wrong thing. And I think, especially for young artists and young activists, or young people interested in, changing their reality or our collective reality, for me, I think about leading by example. I'm like, if somebody younger than me is watching me, I want them to, basically, if somebody's watching me and I don't know it, I want them to catch me in the act of greatness. I want them to catch me being the best version of myself that I can be. And so that continually challenges you. It's like, how am I going to show up each day to myself and to the people around me and to this space, and what can I contribute? So like, I say get in where you fit in, and definitely like do your homework. We spend a lot of time like in different spaces, but there's nothing wrong with just reading. And we've been given the blueprint time and time again by some of the world's greatest thinkers and writers, and Black liberators, liberators of all different varieties. But I think, particularly right now, like spend time like, really ingesting critical race theory and Black feminist thought, and like allow yourself to like expand in that way. And definitely, to me, maybe even above all, is like embrace the uncomfortability of it. And I mean, I say this to like any white people watching right now, is they're like, it's gonna be uncomfortable for you. And that's something to lean into, rather than running away from, because that running and that complacency and that silence is a form of violence that has led to the situation that we're in now. Like we've had enough people looking away when it's uncomfortable, enough people not doing anything when it's uncomfortable. And so I think like you have to get uncomfortable and have those tough conversations, you know. And so, I mean, I guess as a word of encouragement, I say rest whenever you can, and you know, do the things that fuel your spirit, that keep you passionate. You know, I call my brother every day because he just gives me life, you know. So you have to do those things that keep you fueled, you know, because that's what I'm saying. It's like, it's an ongoing struggle, and some of us are gonna die in the fight. So like the quicker we can come together around it, the less people that have to like die for us to get the reality that we want, you know. So I guess that's my three.
Anyone else wants to chime in?
Yeah, I think for me at least, the way it worked is at first I was very obsessed with technicality. I really been drawing since I have memory, but like in my early 20s, I was really bad at drawing, I thought. And that's what pushed me to go to art school. I really wanted to improve all my drawing skills, and like, but I, at one point, and I believe was graduate school, at one point I realized that I was doing everything for myself because I enjoyed drawing, because I really wanted to create an accurate figure. But the moment I realized that art was actually a language that can be powerful, I decided to stop making art for myself. And all of a sudden, I focused all the energy on creating and speaking about the people that I work alongside, who I felt couldn't tell their stories or what they're feeling. So I feel like what I'm trying to say is that if everything became more powerful for me the time I turned art to represent other groups, and in the process I obviously include myself. So I feel like I'm using this language of art making to give voice to the voiceless. And so if that is somehow a piece of advice that I can give to young artists, that's my piece of advice. Yeah.
I want to add that for me, young artists are also activists. Since this is not a job, it's your life. It's important to enjoy.
Yeah.
That, yeah, it really need to make sense, because yeah, this is most of the time the reward, and there is no always success or what people understand can understand as success. I don't know what it is, but it need to worth it, and you need to enjoy. And then if you cannot enjoy, please do something else, because
Yeah, I want to reiterate that too, because I think making art has value for everybody in every walk of life. But if you want it to be your career, it really, you like, for me, I know I would like die if I stopped making art. Like my system would just break down. And so like, if it's not life or death, just do it as a hobby, because it's not all like Instagram makes it look real cute. You know, the internet, like when you're in the limelight, it's cute. But when you go 6 months without getting a check, you know, it's not so cute anymore, you know, like, and you're still in the trenches. So for the people that are aspiring to be artists, like, you know, I think it's important, like Cristina said, to like enjoy it, because if you don't enjoy your work and you end up working that as much as you have to work to be a professional artist, then you're going to be a miserable person. And I feel like the world needs more genuinely joyful people. So, you know, I agree with Cristina 100%. Like, enjoy it, and only do it for a career if you're like maybe a little crazy and there's no other choice. Like, art is all I'm good at. So
Listen, unless there's a burning question out there somewhere, Noel, that needs to be answered, I would suggest maybe, the artists think about any questions they might have for each other,
I think that's an excellent idea.
I don't want to take up too much airspace, but first of all, Narciso, I'm like in love with your work, and I'm gonna have to. I don't know what I need to do, but I need a piece, so we can trade or what. But I just want to just give you a shout out that like I love your work. My grandparents were farmers. My dad grew up on a farm. I'm like sitting on a farm right now, so like I just resonate with your work, and it's beautiful what you've done, and I really appreciate what you said about like being a voice for the voiceless. So that's not really a question. I just wanted to give you some love.
Thank you. Yeah, no, surely. I'm down, man. Let's keep in touch. For sure.
All right.
Let's make an exhibition.
Yeah, well, exactly. Here we go. We have another exhibition coming out. Wonderful. I love that, man. I'm down with that.
Yeah, I like what I like is I like the I really Narciso, I enjoy the figurative works on the three-dimensional boxes. It's incredibly powerful, and it's mind-boggling how many thoughts that brings up. So I love it. So
thanks, man. Appreciate it for sure.
All right, guys. Hard to believe, but we're coming up on a couple of hours.
Wow, yeah, it really flew by.
Yeah, on behalf of the Contemporary Art Museum, I'd like to really thank all of you for such a lively and enlightening conversation, and Christian for being the curator of this wonderful exhibition.
Thank you. And let me just get one last word, and that is.
Last word is yours.
Listen to me. I really have nothing but admiration and gratitude for the four of you guys for coming on with me. This is, I know, a fairly new thing, right? I don't know how many of these you guys have done. I've done one, you know. They both of them, but this one especially, I've found to be incredibly successful because I get to talk to people like you and to share ideas. And the sharing of ideas nowadays, is not so common. We don't get to do this often. I don't think audiences get to hear us often. They're Netflixed out. It's important that we have more of these. So anyway, all the gratitude in the world to you four guys and to all the other artists participating. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank everyone on the team at USF-CAM again for just absolutely brilliant work. We've worked at an almost breakneck speed to put this thing together, and I think it's come together beautifully. Again, big love to all of you, and that's it for me. Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Well,
everybody.
yeah. Thank you for the invite, and thanks
Thank
everybody.
you.
It was nice meeting you.
Bye.
Super nice to meet you.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao.